There comes a moment in every life when the greatest battle is no longer with the world outside, but with the voice within. It is a quiet voice. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it roars. It tells you that you are not enough, not ready, not capable. It reminds you of old mistakes as if they are permanent marks upon your soul. It gathers every disappointment, every rejection, every wound, and presents them as proof that you should expect less from life. But what if that voice is lying? What if the walls that seem to surround you are built not from reality, but from thoughts repeated so often that they have begun to sound like truth? How many dreams have been buried beneath a single sentence, "I can't do it"? How many beautiful possibilities have faded because fear disguised itself as wisdom and doubt disguised itself as fact? The mind is a powerful place. It can be a garden where hope blooms even in difficult seasons, or it can become a prison where every negative thought locks another door. The tragedy is not that negative thoughts appear. They visit every human being. The tragedy is when we invite them to stay, when we give them authority over our choices, our confidence, and our future. You were not born believing you were incapable. You were not born carrying the weight of self-doubt. Somewhere along the journey, the world offered you fear, disappointment, criticism, and uncertainty. Yet the same journey has also offered strength, resilience, wisdom, and the power to begin again. Today is not about pretending life is easy. It is about recognizing that your thoughts are not your master. It is about refusing to hand your future to the darkest voice in your head. It is about standing in the light of your own possibility and understanding that the life waiting for you on the other side of negative thinking is larger, brighter, and more extraordinary than you have allowed yourself to imagine. Negative thoughts often feel natural because they arrive uninvited and speak with confidence. They tell us who we are, what we can achieve, and what we should expect from the future. Over time, many people begin to treat these thoughts as facts rather than opinions. Yet one of the most important truths about the human mind is that negative thinking is rarely an accurate reflection of reality. It is usually a collection of learned fears, old experiences, inherited beliefs, and repeated assumptions. These thoughts are shadows cast by past events, not permanent truths carved into stone. A child is not born believing they are incapable, unattractive, unworthy, or destined to fail. Those ideas are gathered along the way. They may come from criticism, rejection, disappointment, comparison, or moments of embarrassment. A person experiences failure once and begins to fear failure everywhere. They hear enough negative comments and eventually repeat those comments to themselves. What begins as an external voice slowly becomes an internal one. The mind records painful experiences and attempts to protect itself from future hurt by expecting the worst. Unfortunately, this protection often becomes a limitation. Many people spend years carrying beliefs that were formed in moments of weakness, sadness, or fear. A single mistake becomes evidence that they are not intelligent enough. One rejection becomes proof that they are unlovable. One setback becomes a prediction of lifelong failure. The mind creates stories from isolated events and then presents those stories as absolute truths. Yet, reality is far more complex. Human beings grow, learn, adapt, and change. No single moment has the authority to define an entire life. Negative thinking also gains power through repetition. A thought repeated often enough begins to sound familiar, and familiarity is frequently mistaken for truth. If a person tells themselves every day that they are not capable, eventually that belief can feel unquestionable. However, repetition does not create accuracy. A false statement remains false no matter how many times it is spoken. The mind can become trapped in patterns that feel convincing simply because they have been practiced for years. Consider how differently people interpret the same challenge. One person sees an obstacle and concludes they are doomed to fail. Another sees the same obstacle and views it as a chance to learn. The situation may be identical, but the meaning assigned to it is completely different. This reveals an important fact. Thoughts are interpretations, not reality itself. They are lenses through which we view the world. When the lens is clouded by fear, everything appears darker than it truly is. Freedom begins when a person learns to question the authority of every negative thought. Instead of immediately accepting a fearful conclusion, they ask whether it is supported by evidence. Instead of treating doubt as truth, they recognize it as a mental habit. With practice, they begin to separate who they are from what they think. They discover that thoughts come and go like passing clouds, while their deeper worth, potential, and humanity remain untouched beneath them. In that discovery, the shadows begin to lose their power, and the mind starts to create space for confidence, possibility, growth, resilience, self-respect, courage, hope, and transformation. Every human being lives by stories. Some are spoken aloud, while others remain hidden in the quiet corners of the mind. These stories shape how we see ourselves, how we interpret our experiences, and how we move through the world. Long before we act, achieve, or fail, we tell ourselves a narrative about what is possible. The remarkable truth is that the quality of our lives is often influenced not only by what happens to us, but by the meaning we assign to what happens. The stories we tell ourselves become the lens through which we view reality. A person who constantly repeats the story that they are unlucky begins to notice every disappointment while overlooking every opportunity. Someone who believes they are not talented enough may avoid challenges that could help them grow. Another person who carries the story that they are resilient approaches difficulties with determination because they expect themselves to find a way forward. In each case, the story becomes a powerful force that guides decisions, emotions, and behavior. What begins as a thought gradually becomes a belief, and what becomes a belief often shapes a destiny. Many of the stories people carry were not consciously chosen. They were formed through childhood experiences, social influences, failures, successes, and the opinions of others. A young person who hears constant criticism may begin telling themselves a story of inadequacy. Someone who experiences rejection may create a narrative that they are not worthy of love or acceptance. Over time, these stories become so familiar that they feel like objective truth rather than interpretations of past events. Yet they are still stories, mental constructions that can be examined, challenged, and rewritten. The danger of a negative story is that it limits what a person is willing to attempt. If someone believes they are destined to fail, They may stop pursuing opportunities before they even begin. If they see themselves as powerless, they may surrender control over decisions that could improve their circumstances. The story creates invisible boundaries. It quietly influences choices until a person begins living according to assumptions rather than possibilities. Positive transformation often starts when individuals recognize that they are both the author and the audience of their internal narrative. The events of life may not always be under their control, but the interpretation of those events remains within their power. Failure can become evidence of weakness, or it can become evidence of courage for trying. A setback can be viewed as a permanent defeat, or it can be understood as a temporary challenge. The facts may remain the same, yet the story changes everything. History is filled with people who achieved remarkable things because they refused to accept limiting narratives. They encountered obstacles, criticism, and uncertainty, but they chose a different story about themselves. They saw potential where others saw weakness. They believed growth was possible even when circumstances suggested otherwise. Their lives changed because their internal narrative changed first. The mind is constantly writing a script for the future. Every belief, expectation, and assumption contributes to that script. When people become aware of the stories they repeat and begin replacing fear with possibility, self-doubt with confidence, and limitation with growth, they create a foundation for a different life. New actions emerge. New opportunities become visible. New strengths are discovered. And new paths begin to open where none seemed to exist before. Fear has a unique way of growing when it is left alone in the darkness of the mind. It thrives in uncertainty, feeds on imagination, and gains strength through avoidance. The longer it remains unchallenged, the larger it appears. A small doubt can become a major obstacle, and a temporary concern can transform into a constant source of anxiety. Many people believe that fear disappears when they feel ready, confident, or certain, but fear rarely works that way. More often it lingers until action interrupts its hold. Courage is not born from waiting for fear to vanish. It is born from moving forward despite fear's presence. When fear remains silent and unexamined, it often creates stories that seem convincing. It predicts failure before any effort is made. It imagines rejection before a word is spoken. It assumes disaster before a journey even begins. Because these predictions happen inside the mind, they can feel real. The body responds with tension, hesitation, and discomfort, as though the imagined danger is already taking place. Yet many fears never become reality. They exist only as possibilities exaggerated by an anxious imagination. Consider how often people postpone important opportunities because of fear. Someone delays starting a business because they fear failure. Another avoids expressing their feelings because they fear rejection. A talented individual refuses to share their work because they fear criticism. In each case, fear creates paralysis. The person remains trapped not by actual events, but by imagined outcomes. The longer they wait, the more intimidating the situation becomes. What could have been a manageable challenge grows into something that appears overwhelming. Action has a remarkable effect on fear because it replaces imagination with experience. When a person takes even a small step forward, They begin gathering real evidence instead of relying on assumptions. They learn that challenges can be handled, mistakes can be corrected, and setbacks can be survived. The mind no longer operates solely in the realm of possibility. It starts dealing with reality, and reality is often less frightening than the stories fear creates. Courage is frequently misunderstood. Many people think courageous individuals are fearless, but courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act, despite feeling afraid. A speaker who steps onto a stage with trembling hands can still be courageous. A person who applies for a new opportunity despite uncertainty can still be courageous. Someone who starts over after failure can still be courageous. Fear and courage often exist together. The difference is that courage refuses to let fear make the final decision. Every act of courage strengthens confidence. Each time a person confronts something they once avoided, they prove to themselves that they are more capable than they believed. The mind begins replacing old assumptions with new evidence. Instead of seeing themselves as fragile, they see themselves as resilient. Instead of focusing on what might go wrong, they begin noticing what could go right. Confidence grows not from perfect outcomes, but from repeated experiences of facing challenges and continuing forward. Fear shrinks when exposed to movement. It loses much of its power when a person chooses action over hesitation. What once seemed impossible becomes manageable. What once felt overwhelming becomes familiar. And what once appeared frightening becomes an opportunity for growth, discovery, strength, self-trust, persistence, determination, and personal freedom. Self-worth is one of the most powerful forces in a person's life, yet it is often misunderstood. Many people believe their value depends on achievements, approval, appearance, status, or the opinions of others. As a result, they spend years chasing external validation while quietly battling an inner sense of inadequacy. The problem is not that they lack worth. The problem is that they have allowed doubt to become louder than truth. Genuine self-worth begins when a person stops believing every negative thought that passes through their mind and starts recognizing that thoughts are not always accurate reflections of reality. The human mind produces thousands of thoughts every day. Some are helpful, encouraging, and constructive. Others are critical, fearful, and limiting. Negative thoughts often arrive with a sense of certainty. They claim that a mistake defines a person's character, that failure predicts future failure, or that rejection proves unworthiness. Because these thoughts sound convincing, many people accept them without question. They treat them as facts rather than opinions. Over time, these repeated messages shape how they see themselves. A person who constantly believes their negative thoughts may begin living beneath their potential. They avoid opportunities because they assume they are not capable enough. They remain silent because they fear judgment. They settle for less because they believe they deserve less. The tragedy is that these decisions are often based not on reality, but on distorted perception. The mind becomes a harsh critic, evaluating every flaw while ignoring every strength. It magnifies weaknesses and minimizes accomplishments until a person loses sight of their true value. Self-worth grows when individuals learn to challenge these internal messages. Instead of automatically accepting a negative thought, they begin asking important questions. Is this thought actually true? What evidence supports it? Would I say this to someone I care about? Often, the answers reveal that the thought is exaggerated, unfair, or completely false. This process does not eliminate negative thinking overnight, but it weakens its influence. The person begins creating distance between their identity and their passing thoughts. One of the most important realizations in personal growth is understanding that every human being has flaws, makes mistakes, and experiences setbacks. Imperfection is not evidence of worthlessness. It is evidence of being human. Yet many people judge themselves by standards they would never apply to anyone else. They expect perfection from themselves and then feel inadequate when they inevitably fall short. True self-worth emerges when a person accepts their humanity without allowing imperfections to define their entire identity. When people stop believing every doubt, they create room for a more balanced view of themselves. They begin acknowledging their strengths alongside their weaknesses. They recognize their progress instead of focusing exclusively on their shortcomings. They understand that failures are experiences, not identities. This shift changes how they interact with the world. They become more willing to take risks, pursue goals, and express themselves authentically because their confidence no longer depends entirely on external outcomes. The opinions of others also lose some of their power. A person with healthy self-worth understands that criticism may contain lessons, but it does not determine their value. Rejection may be painful, but it does not define who they are. Success may be rewarding, but it is not the source of their worth. Their value exists independently of temporary circumstances. It is rooted in the recognition that they are more than their fears, more than their mistakes, more than their doubts, and more than the limiting stories their mind has repeated for years, allowing them to move forward with greater confidence, dignity, self-respect, resilience, and inner strength. A renewed mindset has the power to transform an entire life because every action begins with a thought. Before people change their circumstances, they often change the way they see those circumstances. The difference between feeling trapped and feeling empowered is frequently found in perspective. When negative thinking dominates the mind, pain appears permanent, obstacles seem impossible, and limitations feel absolute. But when a person develops a renewed mindset, the same challenges can become opportunities for growth, learning, and transformation. The external situation may not change immediately, yet the internal experience changes dramatically. Pain is a universal part of the human experience. Everyone encounters disappointment, loss, rejection, failure, and uncertainty. These moments can leave deep emotional scars and create beliefs that influence future decisions. Many people allow painful experiences to become the foundation of their identity. They define themselves by what hurt them, what they lost, or what went wrong. As a result, they carry the weight of the past into every new opportunity. Their expectations become limited because they assume the future will mirror their previous experiences. A renewed mindset does not erase pain or pretend difficult experiences never happened. Instead, it changes the meaning attached to those experiences. Rather than seeing pain as proof of weakness, a person begins viewing it as evidence of survival. Rather than interpreting hardship as punishment, they see it as preparation. The challenges that once seemed destructive can reveal strengths that would otherwise remain hidden. Resilience, patience, wisdom, empathy, and determination often emerge from difficult seasons. The experience remains the same, but its significance changes. Limitation often begins in the mind before it appears in reality. When individuals repeatedly tell themselves they are incapable, they stop attempting things that could help them grow. They create invisible boundaries around their potential. These boundaries feel real because they influence behavior, but they are often based on assumptions rather than facts. A renewed mindset challenges these assumptions. It asks whether perceived limitations are truly permanent or simply beliefs that have never been questioned. History offers countless examples of people who achieved extraordinary outcomes despite facing enormous obstacles. Their success was not the result of perfect circumstances. It was often the result of refusing to accept limiting beliefs. They encountered barriers, setbacks, and failures, yet they chose to view those experiences differently. Instead of seeing obstacles as signs to stop, they saw them as challenges to overcome. Their mindset became the foundation for their persistence. A renewed mindset also changes how people respond to the future. Negative thinking tends to focus on risk, failure, and disappointment. It encourages avoidance and hesitation. A healthier perspective acknowledges challenges while remaining open to possibility. It allows people to approach life with curiosity rather than fear. They become willing to learn new skills, pursue meaningful goals, and take calculated risks because they no longer assume the worst outcome is inevitable. Transformation rarely happens through a single dramatic moment. More often, it occurs through small shifts in thinking repeated consistently over time. Every positive choice, every hopeful perspective, and every decision to challenge a limiting belief contributes to a new way of living. Gradually, confidence replaces self-doubt, purpose replaces confusion, and possibility replaces fear. What once seemed like an impossible future begins to feel attainable. Pain becomes a source of wisdom. Limitations become stepping stones. Challenges become teachers. And life begins to unfold with greater meaning, opportunity, growth, fulfillment, courage, optimism, and purpose.